Hi, my name is Benedict. It's been a while since I've made a recording. For anyone who hasn't worked this out or seen it, I increasingly felt like it was sort of pointless. I've done this simply because I've done this, and there's been discussion online. There's the fellow whose name I forget. I'll see if I can find one of his videos to put his face up, who has made, I think, a very, very valid set of points about... first, I think it was all EQs sound the same. People have been pedantic, but essentially... yes, the math is the same. A 0 is a 0, a 1 is a 1, a sine wave is a sine wave. You can be pedantic and say, oh, but the one that's got saturation sounds different. But it only sounds as different as the saturation. Take the saturation off, turn that button off, the EQ sounds the same. One of them may have a wonkier curve than the other, but if you made the other one have that kind of wonky curve, they sound the same. There should be no need to debate about this. He's also talked about... how I think one of his more recent ones was the analog style plugins are really essentially the same. You can get the same results, and he A-B'd a mix with one that was covered in sort of analog plugins, and the other one was using pure hardcore digital tools, Reaper's tools, and there was really no consensus on which was right or wrong. But if anything, when it came to it, most people seemed to prefer the Reaper digital mix than the supposed analog one. So again, I think he's making a very fair point. Stepping outside of the pedantry that people have so that they can defend what doesn't need defending, is that they are essentially the same. And this whole idea that people have built up over the last 20 years or whatever, I've always said was just a pile of stinking BS. They essentially sound the same. Now, with the new Moog synth coming out, the Muse, I've listened to some things and it's like, ooh, that sounds nice. But my first thoughts there are, if I were to treat that the same as any other soft synth that comes out, that I play with it and I go, okay, how close can I get with my existing tools? I'm intrigued to know how close would I really get. So therefore, is there much inherent goodness inside the Moog that there isn't inside a digital synth? Obviously, without having one, I won't know, but I did have a Slim Fatty, and I used a sound in a track and asked people to choose which was the real Moog sound, which in theory should be easy, seeing it's significantly better, apparently, according to their theory. And nobody to this day has ever picked the Slim Fatty sound. Every single sound that they picked was Thor. So here I said, okay, let's see how Moogy I can get with one of my instruments, and let's see how close I can get with Europa. Now here's the pair of them playing together. Here is what's clearly a sort of a mini Model D clone. No effects or anything at the moment. And that's playing this line. And then the other contender being Europa. And we can tell, because that's Europa, and I mute it and it goes away. This one is duo line, I mute it, it goes away. I make it really clear that this is what's happening because it's not easy to hear the difference. And so as we can tell with them together, they become a little richer, but not significantly different. I will admit it did take some time. And just for anyone who wants to see, this is the sequence. So played it firstly with just with the duo line, and then just copied and pasted the note clip across to Europa. So they are exactly the same performance, meaning that I can do this direct A/B business. So if I get them playing... there's no super obvious thing. There's always going to be a little difference because they're two separate instruments that are running probably slightly different LFO rates, probably slightly different detune rates because I don't have the same set of numbers on duo line. I see no numbers at all for tuning or any other thing. So whereas Europa, I can tune or whatever and use exact numbers. So I've put knobs and buttons roughly where they were in the other one as I duplicated here and then adjusted based upon what I feel like I'm hearing, better, worse, what have you. It did take me a while, I admit, to actually resolve the fact that, I forgot to turn that back on in these, but I'll leave it off because I forgot and I feel like it matches. I did initially have these second and third oscillators at -1 octave, but then I realized, because you can't really tell in duo line, that my first oscillator was at -1 or 16, and the second and third were actually at 8. So the duo line is 1's octave, say -1 octave, and these are at 0, or most likely 8. Foot. Synthesis should know what I'm talking about. So then we got the pair of them. If we now add an LFO, so there's no feeling from my hands, I can't hear a difference. If I go faster, as we get into audio rate, we can hear some audio rate modulation. But again, that's going to be because our oscillator phases and any LFO phases, anything like that, are going to be slightly out. So we'll get the wave starting to go up, and then suddenly it's going in a slightly different direction as we swap from one to another. But when we do it smoothly, there really is no difference. Now that it's found a note again, it's possibly running slightly hotter than I intended, but again, any distortion we're hearing is universal. I'm not going to go changing that. There's no notable difference. I did, you will see, have to drop Europa, because it turned out in the end that Europa was running hotter than duo line. Now, duo line naturally runs pretty hot. So, like many synths, they tend to run hotter than a lot of the stock Reason stuff, which is part of why people go, oh, but the Reason stuff's wimpy and what have you. But as soon as you get them to the same level, they tend to be just as anything else. Some synths, big name stuff, they really run far too hot. They're in clipping with the first sound, which makes them sound big and fat, but it's a furphy, which aligns with that fellow's points, that there's a certain amount of furphying going on, whereas Reason always had a rule that every sound should run at -12 dB, meaning that you could pile 4 or so sounds without blowing your mix straight out of the box, as opposed to a lot of VST that blow the mix with the very first sound before you've done a thing. So I just had to, by eye, get these so that they matched a bit better, because this one was a little above. So they definitely pass the A/B test. You can hear the thump, which is like a DC thing, but that's to be expected. Of course, in a mix, we would have effects. Whilst I had these effects exactly copied and pasted on each instrument, there was a more noticeable difference as I A-B'd them, because obviously these would have been even more sort of offset phase-wise from each other, so we would have had that conflict of changing the wave shape as we go through. But so then I thought, oh no, that was pretty poor science, so I put it after the crossfader, and again, this is more than close enough for knife fighting. So my point here is that do all synths sound the same? To a reasonable extent, yes. Obviously, if one of these was a DX7, or algorithm in this case, would they sound the same? No, because they've got a very different style of sound creation. And yes, both of these are digital synths, but they come from different manufacturers. The code base is different. The sound creation is different as much as is sound creation in digital or whatever. If I were to get a Moog anything, would it sound different? Yes, but once I could work out how and why it sounded different, which often just comes down to scaling of knobs or the overall output level, or not that I'm suggesting Moog do this, I think some other synths do, but an inbuilt EQ curve or something like that, if there was something like that going on, and Moog's famous for lots of saturation, which I had to work on putting into Europa, sort of driving things, although I ended up not driving stuff as much as I thought I was going to, we end up with the same result. So that doesn't necessarily mean that one shouldn't have different synths. Different synths might lead you to delivering a different result, but in the sense that some are better than others, this seriously dents that argument. Of course, those who want to believe that argument will ignore this or simply throw hand grenades at me, which probably just proves my point rather than proving their point. My point being that it's very easy to be fooled in this game. Like, that it's very easy to feel like, oh, well, this one's going to feel more analog because it's got, analog-y knobs, than to sound as analog-y as this one, because while it's got some analog-y knobs, it's got plenty of not analog-y knobs. And that is leading us by the nose. The developers are leading us by the nose. So, yeah, quite simply, do you need another synth to sound better? Probably not. What you would be better off doing is taking the synths that you've got, provided they have a good architecture, and actually learning them. Because the more you learn them, the more you'll be able to make them sound like whatever you want them to sound like, so long as you are not crossing a barrier like FM. But that said, then this is a very digital synth. I often end up making sounds that people would ascribe to FM inside Europa, which is obviously closer in many ways to Serum than it is to a Mini or to a DX7. So it straddles quite a lot of things, but it's just a case of understanding the architecture. So I was pretty chuffed with myself. It's not the first time I've done this, but it's probably the most time that I've put into getting things to sound the same as each other. Here we go. There were some little differences, but I've largely ironed them out, and enough that, as I say, for knife fighting or inside a mix, no one's going to say that I swapped synths on them. Because look here, I'm swapping synths on you all the time and you're not noticing. Yes, we can do it here. And you're just not hearing it until we get into audio rate modulation. And again, that's not proof of the synth sound being different anywhere near so much as them just being slightly out of phase with each other, which is inevitable. Unless we were to take, I don't know, maybe two DX7s, we could get to be phase accurate, maybe two Juno 106s without their choruses on, we could get to be phase accurate, maybe. But even there, it would be slightly pointless sort of a thing, because we'd be arguing over a pedantry that has no value. All right, if you have any fair questions about how this was done, ask down below. If you just want to dump on me, go make your own video, because a discussion is one thing, dumping on other people, not cool. Get out there, have a great day. If you want to hire me for something, you're going to. If you're not, whatever. Have a great day.